I had one session with the physio and the exercises made it worse, so I'm not going back. Okay, so there's a problem here. Rehab exercises are designed to stress the injury site itself, but not overstress it, of course. You want to put some pressure on the injury to get that injury to adapt to the forces, to the loads, to the ranges that you're trying to apply to improve ultimately the sensitivity of your injury and to improve their function and get them back to 100%. So obviously you are finding that delicate balance between load and overload. And this is obviously where this type of problem where a patient might think, oh, that exercise has made it worse, so it must be the wrong exercise, may well be slightly off base, because it means it's loading the injury, but obviously it's probably just overloading ever so slightly. So it's therefore important to go back to that physio to make sure that they can adjust the exercise. It might be adjusting the range of motion of the exercise, it might be adjusting the load of the exercise, or maybe even adjusting the exercise itself to get it in that window, that sweet spot where you're loading for adaptation purposes, but you're not overloading and irritating the problem itself. So obviously this kind of school of thinking where people think, well, you want to get that exercise, it should be perfect straight away, is not always going to be the case. And this is down to actually irritability factors, structural factors. So some injuries are very good at telling you at the time of doing an exercise if it's going to be too much. They're normally highly innervated, lots of nerve supply, and other structures aren't so good at this. Other structures can tell you, not at the time, you kind of think, oh, that was fine, that was. And then later on the next day, you then recognize whether or not it was too much, or it was perfectly fine, or even that it was underdosed, which means you want to make it harder. So obviously some of it is a suck it and see kind of mentality. You've got to sometimes try and exercise at a certain level, and then you've got to see what that does over the next couple of days. If it's too hard, you have to adjust it. Obviously, if a patient then goes away and doesn't come back to see you, then you're not going to be able to adjust it. And they obviously need to be educated in this idea that this is how rehab works. There's an element of educated trial and error with this. A good analogy is going to a Michelin-starred chef and saying, right, I want you to make this dish and I want you to season it, but you're not allowed to taste it. Well, they'd be like, well, that's ridiculous. I need to season it, taste it, see if it needs more seasoning, or I need to adjust it. And then you adjust it accordingly, and then they have a Michelin-starred dish. Instead, you could actually do it blindly and end up with a really horrible underseasoned dish. And that would be crazy to actually say, I want you to make the dish, but don't taste it. And if it's underseasoned, you just throw the baby out with the bathwater type idea and say, well, that dish is ruined. You'd be like, well, no, you just need to change the seasoning amount in that dish, add a bit more. And in rehab terms, that can be adding a bit more, or in a lot of cases, it can be making it a bit easier. So it's the devil's in the detail. It's not always the exercise, it's the dosage of the exercise. Another analogy would be thinking of a medication. So say you've got an infection. So you think, well, all right, I'll take 1 a month of antibiotics. It's like it didn't work, so it must be the drug that doesn't work. And it's like, well, no, it's the dose is wrong. It's underdosed. And on the flip side, take too much, mega doses, and you cause harmful effects. So of course, that would be a bad idea as well. So it shows you that it's about finding that zone. Some injuries are lucky and you get immediate feedback as to whether that injury is tolerating that exercise at that level. And others, there is a delayed effect. There's delay in inflammatory responses and so on and so forth. So there's definitely this sort of test, retest, and adjust and change and adapt on the fly, which is super part of rehab, and it's all part of what physios do every day. And I think that's where the education side to a patient when you first see them is very important, to make sure that they understand that they need to find that rehab sweet spot. You're not always going to find it straight away. Sometimes you might overwork it, underwork it, but you've got to find that level. And sometimes that's the hardest bit, is to get that zone to begin with. Once you've found that zone, then you can then adapt to that level of intensity, whether it's the range or the load or the exercise, and then advance the load and the range or the exercise until you build them up in that adaptability rehab sweet spot to get back to full function. So yeah, so this would be to a patient, of course, as well, is it's very important to not just one and done it, think, well, that made it worse, so that's the wrong exercise, the physio's made me worse, whatever. It's not as simple as that. You've got to go back to the physio because they need to see, did it need more seasoning or less seasoning? Did it need adjustment? And if you get it bob on first time, then that's brilliant. It's obviously that type of structure which is easy to analyze. Some structures aren't as easy to analyze. They aren't as giving you that information straight away. So anyway, I just thought I'd do a video on this because it's an interesting topic area. Anyway, that's it for this video, and I'll see you next time.